Right. The Real Food Challenge is a campaign and a network of students across the country leveraging the resources and power of universities to create a more just and sustainable food system. The Real Food Challenge campaign and movement for real food was launched in 2008 with a national goal of shifting $1 billion away from industrial farms and junk food and towards community-based, fairly produced, humane, and ecologically sound food sources by 2020. Why $1 billion? Nationally, colleges and universities spend about $5 billion on food every year. Our goal is to shift 20% of that, which is $1 billion, to what we call real food by 2020. What is real food? Real food is a holistic term we use to describe the many positive attributes of a nourishing food system. In fact, we define real food as food that is truly nourishing, not only to consumers, but to producers, communities, and the earth as well. Real food considers a concern for many aspects of the food system. Real food is accessible, healthy, embedded in culture and community. It's climate conscious, conserving of natural resources, respectful to animals, and is produced by farmers, farm workers, fishermen, and food service workers who have safe working conditions and who are paid fairly for their work. We believe that the colleges and universities have an important role to play in creating a food system that nourishes us in this way. Institutions of higher education have a unique responsibility to exercise leadership in our communities and throughout society by modeling ways to support ecologically sustainable, humane, and socially equitable food systems. The Real Food Calculator provides us with the first step, being able to concretely identify the farms, food businesses, and products that truly represent the type of production practices we'd like to support.
Excuse me, but is there supposed to be new slides? Because there's no slides coming up.
Oh, yeah. I'm on a slide that says, "What is real food?"
No.
No.
Our view is still stuck on slide 4.
Okay.
We're still stuck on the one that says Real Food Challenge and the 1 billion underline.
Got it. Let me see if I can do something on my end. What about now? Is it still the same?
Not here.
Uh-oh.
Still on slide here.
Okay.
Lucy, do you want me to try screen sharing from my end?
Yeah, that would be great.
Sure.
Cool. Do you have access to doing that?
Seems like I do.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties. Thanks for your patience, everyone. We're just gonna see if Hannah can do the screen share. It seems to not be working on mine properly.
Hannah, I made you a co-host as well, so you should have screen sharing privileges.
Cool, thank you, Erin.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Yeah, it's good.
Now it's working.
Great.
Does that work?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I'll do my best not to dizzy you with the scrolling screen.
Cool. And then, great. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Hannah. Okay, so what is real food? Real food is a holistic term we use to describe the many positive attributes of a nourishing food system. In fact, we define real food as food that is truly nourishing, not only to consumers, but to producers, communities, and the earth as well. Great. And so the Real Food Calculator provides us with the first step, being able to concretely identify the farms, food businesses, and products that truly represent the type of production practices we'd like to support. For a given food product to count as real food, it has to meet specific criteria in at least one of the 4 categories: local and community-based, ecologically sound, humane to animals, or fair to producers. It's our hope that by investing in producers that are local, fair, ecologically sound, and humane, our colleges and universities are investing in a food system that is truly nourishing to ourselves, our campuses, and producers in our communities and across the globe. Next slide. Largely encouraged by students, scores of colleges and universities have adopted the Real Food Calculator as a rigorous assessment and tracking tool. And many of those institutions have formally committed to and are making progress towards purchasing at least 20% real food by 2020. In the CSU, students across the state came together to advocate for a new section in the CSU sustainability policy on food, which was approved in May 2014. The language is all campus food service organizations should track their sustainable food purchases. Such tracking and reporting will be grounded in the Real Food Challenge guidelines or equivalent, with consideration to campus requested improvements. Campuses shall strive to increase their sustainable food purchases to 20% of total food budget by 2020. And campuses and food service organizations shall collaborate to provide information and or training on sustainable food service operations to staff and patrons. And most recently, in the California State Student Association, which is the student council and voice of nearly 500,000 students in the CSU, approved the resolution supporting real food systems in the CSU. And most relevant to today's conversation might be their recommendation that the section on sustainable food service in the CSU sustainability policy be fully implemented by the Chancellor's Office and each individual CSU campus with high priority and collaboration with students, and that campuses use the most current version of the Real Food Standard/Guide and the Real Food Calculator to reach and go beyond the goal of 20% real food by 2020 and thereafter. Great, and next slide. So now that we have some context around Real Food Challenge, let's explore the Real Food Calculator as a tool. The Real Food Calculator was developed in 2008 as a way to consistently measure just and sustainable purchasing on college campuses nationwide. Then, as now, too many campuses were using widely different metrics, definitions, and reporting tools to track and report on food sustainability. With the proliferation of ever more label claims and certification systems, figuring out what was real and what wasn't was becoming a complicated task. Those assessment tools that were uniform and consistent across the country relied on self-reporting from dining and sustainability offices, raising fears of greenwashing. So in 2008, the Real Food Calculator was developed as a vital part of the launch of the Real Food Challenge. It was created by a national team of students in conversation with industry and sustainability experts. It was designed to be a rigorous yet simple to use assessment tool that students could implement consistently across the country to hold their own campuses accountable to impressive procurement goals. At its heart, the Real Food Calculator is a way for students to actively engage with the campus food system and dining decisions on campus. It's also a way for institutional officials, dining operators, and the broader campus community to better understand what they're spending money on and how they can make progress towards greater real food purchasing. And in 2016, the Real Food Standards were updated to make the calculator the most current and comprehensive guide to sustainable food purchasing in higher education. This revision to the standards was conducted over an 18-month period with input from over 100 industry experts, food service operators, dining staff, farmers, ranchers, fishermen, and students. Advisors on the standards include organizations such as Healthcare Without Harm, the Center for Good Food Purchasing, Association of the Advancements of Sustainability in Higher Education, or ASHE, Friends of the Earth, Consumer Reports, School Food Focus, to name a few. The Real Food Calculator is currently being used by institutions across the country to assess their purchasing of real food. The Real Food Challenge has long partnered with the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, or ASHE, and its Sustainability Tracking, Assessment, and Rating Systems, or STARS. ASHE and RFC staff have reciprocally advised the development of the Real Food Calculator and STARS criteria. Colleges and universities that employ STARS 2.0 as a means to track their institution's progress in sustainability may use Real Food Calculator results to ascertain their STARS points in the food category. The next slide, please. Thank you. RFC's effort to leverage the buying power of universities is complemented by the excellent work of peer organizations in other sectors. In particular, the Center for Good Food Purchasing, which is focused on municipalities, Healthcare Without Harm, which is focused on hospitals, and School Food Focus, which is focused on K-12 schools. To the degree possible, our real food standards are aligned with the standards of these peers. While there are differences derived from unique aspects of our respective sectors, the fundamental priorities and most of the criteria are shared, and food products qualified under our standard will more likely than not be qualified under the other standards. So in essence, the Real Food Calculator is a research project. The components include a small team of researchers, or in some cases, individuals who conduct an assessment, a research question, which is how much real food does my university buy, a hypothesis. This could be a guess about your school's performance based on what your school advertises or what they self-report, raw data, which are the invoices, receipts, purchasing reports, a sample size, usually a representative 2-month sample or larger, and a methodology through web searches and phone calls to our vendors, research each unique product based on the consistent criteria, and our research tools with the Real Food Guide, the assessment tips, and the online web application, and results, which are the budget analysis, intricate breakdowns of local, ecological, humane, and fair purchasing. And then finally, analysis and impact. So based on the results, you'll be able to set goals around increasing percentage and use your analysis for purchasing decisions and influencing campus food policy. So students will be working from invoices, receipts, and purchasing results. They will have very limited information to work with. Based on that limited info, their task as a researcher is to figure out, 1, what is this? 2, where did it come from? And 3, does it qualify as local and community-based, ecologically sound, humane, or fair? At the end of your assessment, you will be able to see results. This includes your total percentage of real food and integrated breakdowns of what is purchased on campus, revealing opportunities for making change. Okay, and next slide, please. Great, so we're going to take a break here to just pause and see if any questions came up before we move on to the next section. And I'm going to hand it over to Hannah.
Great. So if anyone has any questions about the background on the Real Food Challenge and the Real Food Calculator, you can type it into the chat box, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, and this is Erin. I'm just going to jump in real quick and explain that part of the reason we wanted to have a little bit of a background on the Real Food Challenge criteria and the system is because, as you all know, our sustainability policy has a section on sustainable food procurement that does require campuses to assess their food purchases, and that those criteria they use to assess them have to be grounded in the Real Food Challenge criteria. And we know not every campus has an organized Real Food Challenge group of students yet, but these criteria, being familiar with this evaluation process is important because whatever criteria you are using, they do need to be grounded in this assessment tool. So, Hannah, are we going to get to see a little bit more in depth of the calculator tool?
Yeah, we're just taking a moment's pause here.
Great.
And if there's no questions, we can
Cool, thank you for giving some more of that context, Erin.
Great. I see a question here. It says we appreciate that the challenge is student-driven, but dining folks are given a lot of pushback when students call their vendors. Is there any resolve to this? One of the things that we've seen be most helpful here is just making sure that there's open communication between the student researchers and the dining staff so that the dining staff know that students are reaching out to their vendors, know that they're reaching out to the right people, and if there are particular vendors that they want to make sure to be looped in on emails with, for example, sometimes they can do that as well. It is really important that students are able to reach out directly to vendors, but making sure that there's communication actively between the student researchers and the dining staff who are holding those relationships with vendors is one of the things that we've seen be the most helpful in making sure that that process works smoothly, that students are able to get directly in contact with the right people, and that it is in coordination with and in alignment with everything that the dining staff are working on as well. It's a great question.
And Hannah and Rosie, do you have any resources that campus dining staff would be able to send to their vendors that could give them a little bit of a background on, Real Food Challenge and what to expect from those students that are making those inquiries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Two of the resources that we're going to go over in a bit, the Real Food Guide and the Real Food Standards package, offer that kind of background, and those are PDF documents that you can absolutely send and share with vendors or others who might be interacting with the Real Food Calculator.
Great, thanks for those questions. So let's jump into the next section, which is understanding real food. Great. So now that we'll get into understanding what we're measuring. This next section is fairly dense, so feel free to take notes or jot down questions so we can review during the Q&A after. And we'll also have these resources available to you after this webinar. So as we discussed earlier, real food is food that is truly nourishing, not only to consumers, but also to producers, communities, and the earth. To articulate those values, student leaders outlined the 4 main tenets, and we call them categories of real food, which are what you see up here. Local and community-based, fair, ecologically sound, and humane. And the next slide, please. Thank you. Like we said before, real food is truly nourishing. And to producers, consumers, communities, and the earth. And to be specific, real food is food that is local and community-based. These foods can be traced to nearby farms, ranches, boats, and businesses that are locally owned and operated. Supporting small and mid-sized food businesses challenges trends towards consolidation in the food industry and supports local economies. Fair. To producers. Individuals involved in food production work in safe and fair conditions, receive fair compensation, and are ensured the right to organize and the right to a grievance process, and have equal opportunity for employment. Ecologically sound. On the next slide. Farms, ranches, boats, and other operations involved with food production practice environmental stewardship that conserves biodiversity and ecosystem resilience and preserves natural resources, including energy, wildlife, water, air, and soil. Production practices should minimize toxic substances, direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions, natural resource depletion, and environmental degradation. Lastly, humane. Animals can express natural behavior in a low-stress environment and are raised with no added hormones or non-therapeutic antibiotics. Again, by purchasing foods and supporting businesses that are local and community-based, ecologically sound, fair to producers, and humane to animals, we believe that institutions are taking an important step toward a food system that is truly nourishing, not only to consumers, but also to producers, communities, and the earth as well. For the purpose of measurement, we need to get even more specific. So we've laid out a series of eligibility criteria to help us determine objectively and consistently whether a food counts as real or not. So standards that I just read out are outlined in a tool called the Real Food Guide. Let's go over how it's arranged. And Hannah, if you can zoom out just a little bit, getting a little bit cut off from seeing the entire screen. Okay, great. Thank you. So again, there are 4 real food categories, and within each category are a list of certifications and criteria that have been thoroughly vetted. The Real Food Guide is divided into 3 sections that mimic a stoplight. Green, green light. Food items meeting these criteria or bearing these certifications qualify as real food and best represent the standard. Next, we have our yellow light. To our food items meeting these criteria or bearing these certifications that qualify as real food, but the certifications and criteria by which they are being evaluated do not represent the fullest expression of the standard. And last, we have a red light, which is disqualification. If a food item exhibits any disqualifying criteria, it cannot count as real food, even if it meets the standards in other categories. The fair, ecologically sound, and humane categories are mostly built around existing third-party certifications. Third-party certifications are one way to identify products where practices meet higher standards than the industry norms. Ultimately, using a transparent, reliable auditor is most often the best way for student researchers to ascertain the practices of producers. Unlike the other three categories, the local and community-based category is not built around third-party certifications, but rather around specific criteria. Because the criteria for local and community-based, producers can be independently researched by students, such as the distance from the institution. And because shorter supply chains allow for more direct relationships and greater transparency. The characteristics of local and community-based food can be assessed without the use of certifications. This also enables smaller producers who may not be able to afford third-party certifications to qualify as real food. The disqualifiers similarly rely on criteria that can be independently researched by students. Next slide. This is what the Real Food Guide looks like. A real food product is ranked based on how many of the 4 real food categories it meets the criteria for. Real food A is a food item that qualifies in more than one category. For example, meat that is local and community-based and humane. Real food B is a food item that qualifies as real food in only one category. For example, coffee that is fair. Another example is produce that is only ecologically sound. This distinction is made in an effort to recognize various levels of success. Real food A is advantageous for more stakeholders, while real food B has room for improvement. It is important to recognize that progress is being made. Real food A and real food B count equally towards the overall real food percentage for the institution. Okay, so in this section, we will go through the process of researching whether a product qualifies as real food. There are a few resources that will be essential for students conducting the research and also as a reference for folks on this call. The Real Food Guide, which is the central reference tool. The Real Food Guide can be found on our website under the Resources tab. There's another resource called the Assessment Tips that will provide more detailed information on the research process, which you can refer back to after this training and students as well going through the process of researching. And there is an additional resource called the Real Food Standards Package, which offers a series of position papers outlining the principles behind the certifications and criteria found in the Real Food Guide. We encourage you to read through them to learn more about what the standards mean in a broader context of the food system. Great, so next slide, please. Okay. So when students start the research process, the first question they ask is, do they have a reason to believe that this product could qualify as real food? Possible reasons include the product carries a third-party certification, the vendor is regionally based, the product is advertised as sustainable, or that dining staff have suggested that product may qualify as real food. And if you think that the product could qualify as real food, then it's time to start researching. It's not necessary to research a product if you have no indication that it could qualify as real food. Okay, so as we covered earlier, there are 4 categories that define real food. The first is local and community-based. Local and community-based category is based on independently verifiable criteria. There are 3 main criteria that a product must meet. 1, ownership. Other criteria include size and distance. But first, we're going to talk about ownership. So for a product to qualify as local and community-based, the producer must be a privately or cooperatively owned enterprise. Independently and cooperatively owned businesses are more easily held accountable to the values and the needs of their communities. By contrast, publicly traded companies answer to and distribute dividends to many widely dispersed shareholders. Food produced by publicly traded companies or smaller companies that are owned by publicly traded companies cannot qualify as local and community-based. In order to determine ownership, you can start with an online search for the producer name. Is their vendor connected to a large parent or a family company? Are they independently owned? If the online search doesn't turn up in any clear results, search the vendor's website. You can also reach out to the vendor directly via phone or email. It's important to note that seafood must come from owner-operated boats. Keeping fisheries access in the hands of the community-based fishing fleets and supporting fishermen who live and work in their communities. Great, so let's talk about size now.
Hannah, we lost the screen share.
All right, let me see if I can get that back. All right, can you see that again?
Yes, thanks.
Great. Okay. The Real Food Guide outlines specific caps under which a farm or food business will qualify as small or medium-sized enterprise. These caps are designed to ensure that a producer is small relative to the largest company in its particular industry, no more than 1% of the industry leader, and maintains a strong incentive for institutions to purchase from smaller, less advantaged farms and businesses, while also leaving room for those businesses to grow. For produce to qualify, individual farms must gross $5 million a year or less. For meat, poultry, eggs, dairy, seafood, or grocery items to qualify, the companies must gross $50 million a year or less. Most small local operations will be under the revenue caps. If you have any reason to believe that it is a medium to large farm or business, there are a few different ways to check. You can Google the company and see if they have released any recent reports, including revenue. You can research the company on small business directories. If either of those searches reveal a number close to the revenue caps, or if you cannot find any information online, call the business and ask them directly. Okay. If a business has a revenue over the respective size cap, they still may be able to qualify as real food in one of the other categories. So finally, let's talk about distance. For a product to qualify as local and community-based, all production, processing, and distribution facilities must be within a 250-mile radius of the institution. That is roughly the distance that someone can drive, sell to an institution, and return in the same day. The extension of a 500-mile radius for meat reflects the lack of existing infrastructure for meat processing and the increased distance between ranches and potential markets in different parts of the country. For a product to qualify as local community-based, it must be grown locally. That means that a product such as coffee, even if it's locally roasted, could not qualify. Keep an eye out for those situations. Distance refers to the driving distance between your institution and the location of the producer, processor, or distributor. You can use a mapping software, for example, Google Maps, to estimate the driving distance. Sometimes a product has been aggregated. This means that the product comes from multiple producers and is processed or sold together. For example, vegetables may be aggregated from multiple farms through a cooperative, or fish may come from many small boats. If a product has been aggregated, you will need to be able to figure out what farms are being sourced from and make sure that those farms meet the ownership, size, and distance criteria. If not all the farms meet the criteria, but the majority, more than 75% do, then the product can still count as local and community-based in the yellow section. Most local products will be single ingredient products, such as apple, carrots, milk, or eggs. Other products might be multi-ingredient, such as bread, cookies, or ice cream. For multi-ingredient products, at least 50% of the ingredients must meet the criteria to qualify as local and community-based. And there's also a 50% rule for the fair and ecologically sound categories. Okay, so now we'll look into the fair category. And the fair category is mostly based on third-party certifications. For a product to qualify as fair, it must carry one of these certifications listed in the guide. Companies will typically advertise certifications prominently on their websites. This section is separated into international and domestic products. Common products that are sourced internationally and may carry fair trade certifications include coffee, tea, bananas, and chocolate. For domestic products, there are some farms that carry a food justice certification or are certified by the Equitable Food Initiative. There are also 2 worker-driven social responsibility programs recognized in the Real Food Guide. These programs are designed and enforced by workers. They are won through campaigns, building the power of workers in the food system while securing and protecting fundamental human rights and improving working conditions. The Fair Food Program was created by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, a worker-based human rights organization fighting to change conditions in the tomato fields of Florida. The Fair Food Program is a unique partnership between farm workers, Florida tomato growers, and participating retail buyers. The program includes a code of conduct for their supplying farms that establishes 1 penny more per pound of tomatoes, nearly doubling workers' wages. Also worker-to-worker education and systems for reporting abuse. The CIW organized campaigns with college students, communities of faith, and other allies across the country, building enough collective power to move many of the largest retail food companies to commit to the Fair Food Program. Companies who have signed on to this agreement include Sodexo, Armark, Compass Group, Bon Appetit Management Company, the major companies that contract food service on college and university campuses. If you are looking at tomatoes and your campus is contracted to Armark, Sodexo, Chartwells, or Bon Appetit, the tomatoes may be certified by the Fair Food Program. Check whether the tomatoes are coming from Florida, which would mean that they must come from farms participating in the program. The Milk with Dignity program is an emerging initiative from Migrant Justice, an organization of dairy farm workers in Vermont. They have developed a similar program that includes farm worker authored code of conduct defining the human right to work with dignity and fair housing, farm worker education, third-party monitoring, and economic relief for both farmers and farm workers on dairy farms in the state of Vermont. Workers are actively leading a campaign calling on companies who source their milk from Vermont to take responsibility for farm worker rights in their supply chain. This will be most relevant to the campuses in the in the Northeast, but still good to look out for. Here. And we have ecologically sound. So similarly to the fair category, the ecologically sound category is mostly based upon the third-party certifications. For a product to qualify as ecologically sound, it must carry one of the certifications listed in the guide. Companies will typically advertise certifications prominently on their websites. Reaching out to producers and distributors that commonly provide an institution with goods can often speed up the research process. Companies may use different codes to label their organic and ecologically sound products within their invoices. It may also be worthwhile to see if distributors know of any unlabeled products to which real food certifications apply. For seafood, there are 2 labels that are recognized in the guide. The first is the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Guide, Best Choices List. This list gets updated every month, so you can reach out to us at calculator@realfoodchallenge.org to make sure that you're looking at the correct list for the month you're assessing. The second is the Marine Stewardship Council's Blue Eco Label, paired with a chain of custody certification. This means that in addition to the seafood being certified by the Marine Steward Council, the Marine Stewardship Council, the distributor and your campus must also carry the chain of custody certification. For all seafood, it is important to note that only wild-caught seafood can qualify as ecologically sound. One certification to highlight on this list is the USDA Organic Standard and regional certifiers. There are some regional organizations that are accredited by the USDA's National Organic Program and are authorized to certify operations to the USDA's organic standards. This list of regional certifiers can be found online, and those certifications would also qualify as a product as ecologically sound. The humane category is based entirely on third-party certifications. For a product to qualify as humane, it must carry one of the certifications listed in the guide. Companies and farms will typically advertise certifications formally on their websites. You can also research the certifiers themselves, who may have lists on their websites of the farms that they work with. Next slide, please.
Hold on. This one had animation to get the slide in, so we'll just copy that over. It'll take a moment, but I think, Rosie, you can start reading it.
Great.
Or you can start talking through it.
Sounds good. There are a number of reasons that a product could be disqualified from counting as real food. The first is if the producer has been found guilty of criminal charges of forced labor within the previous 10 years. While slavery is present throughout the food system, it is rarely prosecuted, and the cases can typically be identified through an internet search. The second disqualifier is labor violations. A product will be disqualified if the producer is known to have been found guilty or have been cited for a case relating to a serious, repeat, or willful violation within the last 3 years from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the National Labor Relations Board, or the Fair Labor Standards Act. The assessment tips include links to specific databases that can help you identify cases. It is important to check for labor violations, even on local farms, and for processed foods that qualify as ecologically sound. Animal products will be disqualified if they come from a concentrated animal feeding operation or a CAFO. It is important to check all meat, dairy, eggs, and poultry to determine whether the farms qualify as a CAFO, even if they are local. Animals living in CAFO environments are known to have shorter lifespan and higher rates of illness and disease. CAFOs are frequently associated with poor conditions for workers and serious labor violations, as well as environmental harm. CAFOs are also closely associated with intense consolidation in the meat, poultry, egg, and dairy industries, where farmers find themselves subject to unfavorable contracts, uncompetitive markets, and volatile pricing structures. CAFO permits are given by the Environmental Protection Agency or state designated equivalents. If a farm is permitted as a CAFO, then it will be disqualified, unless the farm can prove that it has not had a discharge within the past 3 years.
Oh, wow.
If a farm meets the criteria for a CAFO and has had a discharge within the past 3 years but does not carry a permit, then it will also be disqualified. In the case of dairy that has been aggregated, if the average farm size is less than 200 cows, the dairy will not be disqualified regardless of CAFO designation. How do you determine whether a farm qualifies as a CAFO and whether they have had a discharge in the last 3 years? You can typically access information from the state permitting authorities, either through a public database or by calling or emailing them. There's more information on this process outlined in the assessment tips. An additional disqualifier to look out for is genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Products made with genetically engineered ingredients and their derivatives will be disqualified unless these ingredients are used in trace amounts or the product carries a certification that precludes the presence of GMOs, such as the non-GMO Project Verified or any of the certifications that qualify as ecologically sound. Products that are likely to be GMO and used in significant quantities include corn, soy, beet sugar, rapeseed, papaya, and summer squash. Even local produce, such as corn or squash from a local farm, is likely to be genetically engineered unless you can verify otherwise. So be sure to check for that. The final disqualifier is a list of ingredients typically found in ultra-processed foods. This disqualifier can be easily identified by looking at the product's ingredient list and checking for any of the disqualifying ingredients. The only exemption to the disqualifiers is for products certified through the worker-driven social responsibility programs, which addresses many of the reasons that a product would be disqualified. They challenge consolidated control in the food system, prevent human rights violations, and protect the health and safety of workers. Worker-driven programs are also winning concrete changes on the ground, moving the food system closer to the values of real food. Okay, so
All right.
I'm going to pass over. So we're going to take a pause right now from before moving on to the next section and open up for any questions. And if you can type it into the chat box as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that the disqualifiers weren't visible there, but you can view all of those in the Real Food Guide that we'll be sending out immediately following this, or you can look at the Real Food Guide as we speak. I can write the link in to that document.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, well, if there are no questions, then I'm going to continue on to the final portion of the presentation. Great, so the Real Food Calculator is a student research tool, but there are many important roles that you as a staff hold in the process. Some of you are at campuses where there are already designated positions for student researchers. For others of you, this may be the first step. We have found that to be we have found that to be the setup for success. And it is best to have a team of 2 student researchers paid to be working 10 hours a week. The exact number of hours that the research will take varies based on the number of unique products that are purchased and whether you can access digital invoices or purchasing records, thus minimizing the amount of time for data entry. It can also work to have a larger team, up to 5 students, working fewer hours, so long as one student takes responsibility for coordinating the research. It's important that students have capacity to complete the research. Having paid positions is one way to make that possible. If you do not yet have the student researchers, this gives you the opportunity to create a position with a job description and recruit interested students. There's also a way to institutionalize this research process within your sustainability department or dining operation. Alternatively, some students are interested in doing research for academic credit. This can also be a great project for a whole class to take on, so long as there is a faculty member that is interested and committed to the full research process. Once you have student researchers, one of your key roles is to give them access to the purchasing data. What data should be included? The assessments must include at least 2 representative months of the year. We suggest using October and February. You can also choose to conduct a more comprehensive assessment of 3 months, 4 months, or even all 12 months of the year. If it is the first time that your campus is using the calculator, we recommend starting with the 2 months. The assessment must be representative of residential dining options on campus. We suggest including retail options as well to give the most accurate assessment of your food purchasing on campus. You will need to give the researchers access to records for all food purchased from the dining locations that you have selected during the assessment months. The calculator requires line item data, including vendor name, label, brand, product description, cost, and also, if available, product code. The calculator does not ask for a full unit, for a unit price, only the total amount that was spent on each individual product. Most vendors and distributors are now able to offer digital invoices or purchasing records, sometimes known as philosophy reports. Even if your dining office still uses paper invoices, it is likely that the vendors can offer digital records in request. This significantly reduces the amount of time that students spend on data entry and instead allows them to focus on the research itself. You have an important role to play here. You may be able to interface directly with vendors or to connect researchers to purchasing managers or other dining staff who can get them the data they need. The smoother you can make the process of accessing data, the smoother and quicker the research process will be. If you're at a campus with food service operated by Sodexo, it's important to know that Sodexo and the Real Food Challenge have signed a national transparency agreement, meaning that any student can access purchasing data to run the Real Food Calculator. There is a specific process by which students can request digital reports directly from the Sodexo purchasing system. If you're at a campus with Sodexo or with food service operated by Sodexo, you can reach out to us at calculator@realfoodchallenge.org, and we can send you the details for that process. So each campus will also need an institutional official for their assessment. This is a role that you can play as well. The institutional official is responsible for approving their research plans, as well as supporting the researchers in accessing data for their assessments. To register as the institutional official, you can create an account on the website as a staff or dining administrator, selecting the college/university staff or administrator, or selecting dining service provider staff role. You will then be asked to affiliate with your institution. If your university does not yet have a profile, you can create a new one. Your account will have to be approved by a researcher on the account. If there is not yet a researcher on the account, you can email calculator@realfoodchallenge.org and we can approve your account. The researchers have to complete 2 key steps in order to begin their assessment. The first is to write up an assessment plan, which is essentially a summary of their plan for running the assessment. So which months, which dining locations, their timeline, etc. Once it is submitted, it will need to be approved by both you and the Real Food Calculator support team. If you are designated as the institutional official, you should receive an automatically generated email with a link to approve their assessment. If you don't receive that email, you can log in, click on the link to the assessment plan, and click Approve. The second is to fill out a baseline survey. This includes key information about the dining operation, such as the overall budget, the number of meals served each week, and vendors that you purchase from. This will require you or another staff member to sit down with the researcher and fill out the survey together. As a member of the online institutional profile, you will also be able to view the results of the assessment. And here is a timeline for fall 2017. So by the end of July, you'll receive an email about the process with the timeline and a reminder of the steps for setting up the assessment. In August, if you are creating a new position, this is a great time to be recruiting. You can also begin the onboarding process, working with student researchers on filling out the assessment plan and baseline survey, and gathering data. By mid-September, student researchers should be set. This is a good date to keep in mind if you are creating a new position. And by the end of September, the onboarding process should be complete and the research should begin if it hasn't already. If your campus is new to the calculator, we encourage you to start in the fall to ensure that you have a full year to complete the assessment. However, if they can only get student researchers in spring 2018, there will be another round of research beginning in January that they can join. Okay, and we'll pause here for questions. And this could also be an opportunity if you maybe missed a slide and want to review. We can do that for you right now as well.
Hey, Rosie, this is Erin. Can you clarify about the transparency agreement with Sodexo, what exactly that agreement it allows for? Is it just to access vendor information?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you want to take this, Hannah?
Sure. Yeah. So the National Transparency Agreement between Sodexo and the Real Food Challenge means that any student at a campus with food service operated by Sodexo is able to run the Real Food Calculator, that they can gain access to line item purchasing data and any data that they would need in order to complete their baseline surveys and their assessments. It also stipulates a process by which student researchers can access that information. And so we have there's a template email that a student needs to send directly to someone higher up in Sodexo, CCing their dining manager. It's like a template email that we send to students that they send along. And then someone in Sodexo can send them basically a digital report of line item data, exactly what they need in the format they need for the calculator, of all of the data that they would need in order to run an assessment.
Okay, great. And do you have anything similar, are you working on anything similar with Airmark?
We don't currently have a formal agreement with Airmark, but we have many students at Airmark campuses that are working well with their dining services and are able to get access to similar data. And so we don't have as standardized of a process, but we certainly have students at Airmark campuses that are successfully running the Real Food Calculator.
Okay, thanks.
Great, and I got a question. Question is, some of our invoices are mixed in with other supplies. How do we go about that? So I think this might be something that many folks might encounter, and would you mind addressing that, Hannah, too?
Sure, I can't see the question for some reason, so do you mind reading that one more time?
Yeah, so the question is, some of our invoices are mixed in with other supplies. How do we go about that?
So for that, sometimes, so it's very common that food purchasing invoices are mixed in with, for example, cleaning supplies, napkins, other items that would be used in the dining operation. And you have two options. One is that sometimes you can request that the vendors just send you the food items or invoices or reports, especially vendors that are able to do digital reports. They may be able to send you ones that just have the food items, or you or the researchers can go through and remove any items that are not food items in those invoices.
Great. Any other questions before we move into the closing? Okay. Well, if any question pops up in the future, feel free to reach out directly to me. My email is here on the screen, rosie@realfoodchallenge.org. Oops, I think it was a little bit of a typo. Also, you're welcome to also CC the calculator at realfoodchallenge.org for a lot of technical questions. Happy to follow up through email. And thank you for listening. And lastly, I wanted to just do a quick announcement for a webinar that is going to be led by Estefania, who isn't able to be on this call today, but she will be leading a webinar on product shifts. And once we finalize the date and the timing of that, I can forward that out to maybe Erin to then forward out to the group. And hopefully some of you guys can make it for that.
All right, well, thank you so much, Rosie and Hannah, for leading that training today. And for all you CSU folks, if there are any issues you have sort of on our side of operations, any questions you have for us, or any comments for us at the Chancellor's office, please feel free to email me. You should all have my email, ebrewster@calstate.edu. And you know, anything we can do on our end to resolve some of these issues, please let us know. I know tracking sustainable food procurement is tricky business, so please use us as a resource, and hopefully we can help you guys out on that. Great, and any other questions that you didn't have time to ask, you can follow up with me, and I can always forward it on to Rosie or the Real Food Challenge as well, if or you can email them directly. Right.
Great.
Well,
and
thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to give like a little bit more context to the product shift webinar. So, you know, this whole orientation today was on the calculator and on tracking and reporting, which is one piece of the sustainability food policy. And another piece is to work towards getting 20% real food by 2020. So after you do the calculating and reporting, then you know where your school is at in terms of that percentage. And this product shift webinar could be helpful to start thinking about how you can start increasing that percentage. So I'll send more information out, but I just wanted to give like a little bit more context for some folks that might be ready for that.
Great, thank you, Rosie.
All right, thanks everyone, and hopefully I'll be connecting soon with some of you.
All right, thanks everyone.